Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and we are delighted to have back with us today David Harsanyi. He's a syndicated columnist and author. The first book we talked to him about was Obama's Four Horsemen, and that was an incredible book. Well, he's got a new one out called The People Have Spoken, and They Are Wrong. There's a picture of it there on the screen, and you may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon and take a read. It's fascinating. David, nice to have you back, my friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, what provoked you to go down this road?
Politics, I guess. I sort of dismayed at the decisions that we collectively make, and I'm certainly more dismayed when we make national decisions for people locally, because that's not how I think government should be run. And I think that I have a good case that the founders didn't envision that sort of government either. So the larger government gets, the more centralized it becomes, and the less individuals are able to have the communities that they want. They're sort of forced and coerced by national government to do it.
You know, that is fascinating, because we're seeing the struggle between state and federal, and even within the state, we're seeing the struggle between county and state. Even in the state of Oregon, we just had a special session that ended over the weekend, and we came away scratching our heads and saying, well, wait a minute, where's the will of the people here?
Right. I think people believe that when you say will of the people, that it's, the largest majority you can pull together. But I think, for me at least, it's about individual freedom and a way for people to cluster together in communities and have the things that they want. I'll give you a perfect example. I lived in Colorado for years. There's Boulder, which is extremely liberal, and there's Colorado Springs, which is extremely conservative. People should be able to choose the sorts of communities they live in, rather than having the state or the government federally tell them how they should live their lives. It's pretty simple, and you see it not just in economic terms with Obamacare, for instance. You see it with cultural and societal norms. The gay marriage issue. If government wasn't deciding what marriage looked like and wasn't forcing others to accept the majority's view, then we can just go to our own churches or wherever we want and have the sorts of relationships we think are right. Obviously, that's a very libertarian way to look at it, but
yeah. All right, you say, and why do you say Americans' obsession with democracy is leading to our ruin?
Well, I think that, first off, people treat democracy as if it is tantamount to freedom and liberty, which it's not. It's a process. It's a reflection of either their community or their country or their state, and the majority viewpoints there. The problem is, I think that there are vagaries in democracy. People believe certain things today, they may not believe them tomorrow. I think if we act too quickly, if we have people who scaremonger about certain things, this can be about either terrorism, it can be about economic ruin. We make bad choices that we have to live with for a very long time, and these sort of pile up. So I think that in essence, we have politics too involved in too many aspects of our lives. And so this is really a book about wanting a smaller, more effective government, because as you see now in Washington, what happens in the end is then you have total gridlock when it's all said and done, when you can't, when you have these huge projects come in and the other, the minority says stop.
So then how would you describe democracy?
Well, I mean, we need the idea that the majority is, let me just preface this by saying that the idea that the majority is automatically right or should have the ability to coerce the minority into acting as it wants is problematic to me philosophically, just generally speaking.
Right.
But I would say that democracy, when you have a majority coercing the minority, not always, not everything is a coercion, but oftentimes when we pass large laws, you have coercion. So Obamacare forces us to buy a certain kind of insurance that sets up certain sorts of exchanges that we may not want to participate in. And in the end, everyone's a part of it. Now, if you localize that and let states deal with their own healthcare exchanges and their own healthcare policies, you can move to any state you want and have the type of healthcare system you want to live under. We don't even have that sort of ability anymore in this country. So that's the sort of democracy that bothers me. People often say to me, well, isn't the marketplace a democracy? People vote. Well, no, it doesn't coerce me. I don't have to buy a Justin Bieber album or whatever's out there. I have many choices. The way we have setting up democracy now has been eliminating those choices for us.
Well, it certainly seems so. So where did the term republic fall through the cracks and democracy take over?
Well, in the beginning of the 19th century, there was a bit, I don't know if there's any one moment, but, with progressivism, they are in love with direct democracy, and they're in love with populism, and they're in love with the idea that, the people should have their way. And I don't think the people should have their way. I'm not sure when it exactly happened, but I see it with my kids' textbooks. They talk about democracy as if it equals freedom. But look at Egypt, look at Gaza Strip, look at Russia. You don't always have the best, at least in our view, and considering from our viewpoint, the best sorts of leaders elected. So democracy is simply a reflection of our own ethics and morals. I think that we've had a very good history here with democracy in that sense, but I think that's coming to an end because the divisions in society are too deep to allow that kind of centralized democracy to work. Because
it appears the philosophy of the day, David, is propagating democracy as freedom, when all of it, underneath it all, is really it's a majority rule.
Yeah, and I have a big part of the books about how we don't really understand these things. We're passing laws that are very complex about very complicated issues, and there are a bunch of people in this country who don't care enough to know. They still vote. There are a bunch of people in this country who don't have the time to investigate every issue. And there are other people who do know and scare people and try to get everything whipped up. And the president's a perfect example of this. Not really diving into the issues, not really discussing these things, but simply either, calling the others, you know what he does. So it's populism that's been going on for a long time. It's not just Democrats. But the problem here is that we never actually discuss these issues in a way that's constructive. We just pass laws because we feel good about them, because it's emotion driven. And I think that that's what the founders warned us about when it comes to democracy, and it's what we should be worried about right now.
Well, let's go down that road for a moment. What did our founders say about democracy?
Well, clearly they were, there's a famous Federalist Paper 10, which discusses factions and other problems with democracy. But I think that clearly the way they set things up with states' rights, with the 10th Amendment, with the constant ability of parts of our government to stop other parts of our government. Right now we see it. We see Congress sort of creating gridlock in Washington because we had too much democracy, in my opinion, when the Obama administration first took over. The founders were worried about democracy, some more than others. I actually, and not that I'm in any position to argue with the founders, I think they had a little too rosy of a view of humans and how we would preserve our individual freedoms. I think that the temptation to gather into large groups and undermine the minorities' ability to rule themselves is just human nature often. But they were clearly worried about it, and democracy isn't even mentioned once in the Constitution. The word democracy is not even mentioned.
So, what's the implication?
The implication is that they wanted a republic, not a democracy. I think they were worried about I'm not a historian, but they seem very much to be worried that one state or two states in particular, Massachusetts and Virginia, would dominate politics. And then later on, through that tradition, we have filibusters, we have the Electoral College, we have other ways to diffuse democracy. We used to have the state legislators decide who goes to the Senate. Now we have direct votes, so we've undermined that diffusion of democracy even more. When you bring stuff like this up, people think you're crazy, but I actually don't trust my neighbors to make decisions for me, and I certainly don't trust Oregon to make decisions for Florida or vice versa.
Right.
So I think it's a pretty good system.
All right, so where does class warfare play into this? Because it seems like the current form of democracy that's being pushed fuels class warfare.
Yeah, and that we've sort of that's been going on for a while in certain stages in our history, especially again in the early 1900s. But we've typically not fallen for it overall. But now it seems to me that we do fall for it, and it's the easiest sort of attack you can make on other people because it attacks them. It's jealousy mostly, but it's an easy person to blame for all of our problems, the rich man. I'm not saying that all people are innocent in this, or bankers are all innocent, but I do think it's a simplistic way to look at the world. And it's very easy to have the majority, which has less, decide that they are going to take from the minority that has more. And what happens then is you have a corrosion of your institutions, as I think we're going through now, because we're blaming everything, or at least many in this country are blaming everything on the richest 1% and so forth, when clearly that's not the problem. And what happens is we fall for all kinds of silly economic ideas, like, in my opinion, the minimum wage and other things, sort of populistic notions about how the economy works. Quite often we want to shut down, we become more isolationist, we worry that people are stealing our jobs, things like that, and we have a sort of inflamed discussion that's not very rational about economics, for sure.
All right, let me take a break here, David, and we'll come back. I want you to you mentioned it earlier when we talked about gridlock. At times, gridlock can be a wonderful thing. I mean, it stops nonsense from becoming law. But beyond that, we have an administration that doesn't care about gridlock. And I want you to comment on that. We're talking to David Harsanyi. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back with David Harsanyi, and we had him on earlier about his book. Was very powerful. Obama's Four Horsemen. I don't know if you haven't picked up a copy of this, you may want to grab it and read it. Comes with a great review from Glenn Beck and others. His latest book is The People Have Spoken, and They Are Wrong. It deals with the term democracy. And I think you'll find this to be a very fascinating read, because it does put into perspective how democracy seems to be the word, and the real word that should be spoken is republic, and how the two maybe have gotten separated. We are going to in the break, David. We talked about, and you mentioned earlier, this could produce gridlock. And I can see where gridlock at times can be a good thing, because it stops nonsense from becoming law. But now, in spite of gridlock, we have an administration that's going to govern through executive order. How dangerous is this?
Well, it's very dangerous. I agree. I think gridlock is actually organic in a way. You have government goes too far to the left, and then conservatives, there's a backlash. Conservatives rise in the House, and they sort of shut it down. So I actually think gridlock is very healthy for typically. Problem is when gridlock starts undermining some of the things that we would just naturally do in government to help run the country. So I think that it's bled into places it shouldn't. But generally, yeah, I think gridlock is excellent. I'm one of the few people in this country who think this Congress has done a very good job, because a do-nothing Congress can be an excellent thing. So I agree with that. Yeah, Obama has threatened to use executive orders to govern. But the funny thing about this, or not so funny actually, is that his excuse is democracy. His excuse is, most people want me to do this, so I will do it any way I can. It's a sort of excuse that authoritarians use all over the place. Most people want this, but the process does not allow me to get it done. So there was a speech he gave after the Newton tragedy about guns, where he said 90% of Americans want this, so I'm just going to use an executive order rather than wait for Congress. So in essence, though, he's doing something that's sort of authoritarian. He's using populism as his excuse to do it. And just because 90% of people want something doesn't make it right, A, and B, we have a constitution exactly to protect us from that sort of, rush to change our inherent rights.
Yeah, the only thing I could say about that, there's an additional fallacy here. It seems that they're quoting figures that are just not true. They'll say, they'll quote a figure, and quite frankly, and you know this, David, you watch it, that's just not true.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, these polls, first of all, they're not true generally, but even when we look at polls, I don't know how closely they reflect what people actually are always thinking. But even if they did, my argument is even if 90% of the people want to get rid of the Second Amendment, there's a process, or change the Constitution anywhere. There's a process where you can do that. We have these rights in the Constitution for a reason, and one of them is to protect us from democracy.
Is there any other example out there of democracy run amok that we can learn from?
Meaning in the world?
Yeah, other countries.
Well,
or so-called democracy, I guess.
Well, as I said, it's just a reflection of what we're thinking. So when Israel offered Gaza, autonomy, the first thing they did was elect Hamas, because that reflects what probably most people are thinking there. And when you look at Egypt, when you gave them democracy there, the Muslim Brotherhood took power, and then they were thrown out in an undemocratic fashion. Sometimes you have to wonder, what's more important, democracy or freedom? They're not the same thing. Would you rather have an enlightened nation with a strong constitution that doesn't have an active government, or would you rather just have democracy and see what comes of it? I think the French Revolution and the American Revolution showed what can happen with those two, and it's in their extreme forms, at least.
What happens to morality when democracy runs amok? It appears we are passing laws that are demoralizing morality, so to speak.
Well, and that can happen because, liberals today, they like to pretend that the right wants a theocracy or something. But in truth, almost everything they do is imbued with some sort of moral purpose. So we have to help this one and help that one. And obviously we want to help the poor. We just have different ways of looking at it and different ideas about how that should be accomplished. So I think that now you see religious freedom issues, especially with contraception and other things like that, and Obamacare. That's going to be more and more of an issue because the majority, if they turn more secular, are going to try to force their ideas about the world on the religious minority. And then, of course, you have gay marriage, and and other societal norms. I just don't think government should be telling me what a marriage is either way. That gets very difficult, I understand. But the problem with democracy is that you can force others not only to accept that something exists, but have to, I wrote a piece called Coexist or Else, because you now have to accept their view of the world, the left, so because they have the majority. They wouldn't like it the other way around, and I wouldn't like it either way. So democracy is dangerous in that sense as well. So
do you see a pushback coming, David? Because it seems like we're in the nonsense category now.
I think there'll be a pushback. I mean, there has been a conservative pushback against this sort of thing. People are less, people want, the 10th Amendment to be upheld. They want states' rights. The problem is with democracy and populism is it seems like the courts follow the majority all the time rather than the Constitution, to me at least. It also seems like there just simply aren't enough states to stop what's been going on very effectively. But as I say, I don't know what the future brings. I have to say I'm pretty pessimistic about this issue. I think that when I see my own kids and the textbooks they bring home, the way they talk about democracy and the way they teach American history, there are a lot of fallacies out there that kids grow up with and believe, and then we're sort of stuck with them. They're embedded in our national consciousness, and hard to fix after that, especially because people don't pay that close attention. A lot of people do care about politics, but tons of people do not, and that's dangerous as well.
Well, it's just we seem to be frustrated beyond measure. Now, you watched probably CPAC over the last week or so with all the speeches I did. We just came through a long-time Republican convention up here called Dorchester, and they elected to endorse same-sex marriages, which now has probably split the party right down the middle. I've never seen such confusion. I mean, I don't know. People don't know where to turn. My biggest concern is they'll become fatalistic and not turn out the vote when really the power is in the vote.
Well, yes, you're right, and that's unfortunate because I mean, I argue that I wish that the power wasn't so much in the vote. I wish that there wasn't so much power in the vote because it essentially can change entire communities, and it can change the way we look at institutions like marriage, in a way. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that you have a more secular right side of the equation on the Republican Party that feel a certain way about marriage, and then you have more socially conservative folks, and that's really going to split the party when it shouldn't be about democracy or a vote at all. It should be about whatever your community believes marriage is and what church you go to. But I have a long fight there because I don't think social conservatives want to remove marriage from government either, frankly. So So I don't know what to say. I mean, I think there are three parties in this country: Democrats, and you have two parties on the right, the conservatives and the sort of establishment, and it's going to be really difficult for the Republicans to pull it together.
All right, but given midterms elections, they do have a tendency to go back against the majority at that point. It happened in 2010, 2012, Obama gets reelected. Now we're 2014. It could be a significant pushback, and it could even cost John Boehner his job.
Yeah, it could. And I think when you have House elections, it's a more the more local an election is, the more it's about issues, in my opinion, rather than sort of the presidential election, which is just very, populistic and partisan. So I think that actually the House represents America in some ways better than the presidency does, certainly. And if they win back the Senate, I think we'll just have even more gridlock, which, as I said, I think right now is fine until we come to some sort of consensus on which way the country needs to move. Yeah. And I think there has been pushback in this country. There always is. The problem is that when you pass something like Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever it is, Social Security, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. So even if you have a better idea, because of the scaremongering. So when liberals pass something, it's there forever. And conservatives have a harder time dismantling things. So,
well, it's a fascinating read. In one or two sentences, what do you want people to get from your book? The people have spoken, and they are wrong.
Well, I want them to educate themselves about what they're voting on, and I also want them to care more about federalism and states' rights and things that diffuse national democracy instead of strengthen it.
Okay. All right. The book is entitled "The People Have Spoken, They Are Wrong." David Harsanyi is the author, and you may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon, and get a copy of it and read it. Thanks, David. Keep up the good work, my friend.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. We'll be right back.